I think you have to be in the classroom, because I do think at its core, higher education is what happens in the classroom.
I think it's a great conversation to have with our librarians, to say, look for someone like you. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to do chit chat. You can just say, here's a book I love, you should read it. Hello, everybody. You have joined us for another episode of Cap and Gown. I'm Rachel Phillips-Buck, VP for Student Success at Ferris Resources, joined today by Matt Boisvert, our president. Hey, Matt.
Hi, Rachel. It's not just a episode of Cap and Gown.
What does that mean?
This is kind of a big one.
Oh, yeah. I've known our guest today for a long time. Super excited for him to be able to join us. I'll introduce you to him in just a bit. I hope everybody got to watch the eclipse yesterday. That was pretty exciting.
That was on my, I really wanted to.
Got your glasses on.
I wanted to come out wearing these, but then I couldn't see you. So
yeah, they're very dark, right? Also, Bailey this week reminded us, or actually, I guess, called to our attention, this is our 100th episode, which seems impossible to me. This is kind of a competency that came out of COVID, right? And we just have kept doing it.
And I think it was last week that I said, you should go back if you haven't seen some of the early Cap and Gowns, you should go back on YouTube and check them out. It's amazing. A lot has happened. I think over the summer, I want to run all of the Anthony Melchiori Mission First. That really got us started. So it's great. Celebrate 100.
Yep, pretty exciting. So if you want to be alerted when we have a new episode, you can subscribe on YouTube. You can follow us on LinkedIn. You can listen to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast and follow the show there. That way you'll know whenever we have new things to talk about. Okay, our theme for the year is curiosity. So in that vein, I'm going to tell you 4 of my Google searches this week. Matt is going to do the same, and then he's going to share a curiosity fact with us. Okay, my 4 Google searches. Are you ready? Number 1 is Eurovision 2024.
It's time.
This is sort of a cult classic at Ferris Resources. Our head of retention intelligence, Viva Gore, taught us about it, and now we are starting the time where we're watching all of the videos for Eurovision, and then we all have it on the calendar for May 11th, where we will watch it all day long until somebody is crowned the victor. So if you don't know about it, check it out. Second, I have hotel simulation game, because I am connected to people in the hospitality industry, and there's a whole UIL game where they do hotel simulation. I thought that sounded really fun, but I couldn't find one. So if you know where one is, tell me. Number 3 is longevity noodles, which is a kind of ramen that is one noodle. So I was watching this man from China make it. He gets the dough and he just stretches it 30 feet.
Wow.
Cooks it all in a bowl, and you're supposed to eat it on New Year's, and it represents long life. It's incredible. Go Google it.
30 feet of noodle.
Yeah. And then the last one, this one, well, I always save the most embarrassing one for last. The last one is male singer with face tattoos, because I heard about this guy who I saw him, but I couldn't remember his name, and I knew it wasn't Post Malone. I thought it was the singer named Jelly Roll, but it was a case of mistaken identity. It was not Jelly Roll. It was instead Teddy Swims, who's a great singer. You should listen to him.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to talk about that one again.
Appreciate
Matt, your turn.
Introducing me to that. Okay. Well, of course, I wanted to know more about solar eclipses, and so I Googled when was the last solar eclipse? I also decided to do a little reading on Genghis Khan, so looked up Genghis Khan.
Okay.
Whole bunch to say there. I looked up what a German bow for a bass is. So my daughter is playing bass, and she just started using a German bow and loves it. And so I was like, you're going to have to tell me what the difference is. And then lastly, this last weekend was Sing Song at my alma mater. Abilene Christian University had Sing Song. And I searched sing-song golfers 1995, which
is your
the best show ever. The best sing-song performance.
All
ever.
right. Well, if
There you
people are
go.
curious, they can do those Google searches themselves. What's your fact for the day?
Okay, well, since we were observing the sun, I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about the sun.
Okay.
Again, this comes from National Geographic's Brain Candy for Kids. All right, so the sun, the temperature of the surface of the sun is 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
That's hot.
It's hot.
That is what they believe the Earth's core is also 10,000 degrees. But the air around a lightning bolt is 5 times hotter.
Than the other air?
Well, no, than the sun.
Oh, wow.
50,000 degrees.
Okay.
And a supernova is even hotter than our sun, 10,000 times hotter than the sun. So
I know that you really love space, but it doesn't seem real to me. You know what I mean? So I'm like, yeah, the sun's hot. That's a fact. I know our listeners are thrilled with those facts. They're going to quote them around their dinner table. Thank you for that, Matt. This brings us to the State of the Union.
did you see a little part of me die when you were saying that?
I know. I'm sorry. You need to talk to my sister. She really loves space. She would love to talk with you about it. I'm very sorry.
All right.
Okay. I'm also sorry that we've got to talk about FAFSA again. But you guys, I'm actually to the point now where I'm not even entertained anymore. I'm just like, hey, but for real, the next FAFSA cycle starts October 1st. That's where we are in the cycle. Like, we are so far past it that schools are like, what is happening? So the latest thing is that 330 FAFSAs have to be reprocessed.
Hold on.
What?
330.
330,000 FAFSAs have to be reprocessed. 6.6 million FAFSAs have been submitted so far. Of those, 5 of them were wrong because of a tax mistake. So they were saying that students were less eligible than they actually were. 10% of them were wrong, saying that students were more eligible than they actually were. Last week, FAFSA, or the Department of Education, was like, we're only going to fix the ones that were wrong for the less than, and the other ones we're just going to leave, just assign them, their aid there. And financial aid counselors are like, that's like, numbers are real. You're not allowed to just say, it's fine. We'll just go with what it is. So there's a lot of stress around that. Matt, what I'm thinking about is all of these financial aid counselors who are working 12-hour shifts and over the weekend, and schools are sending resources to them, adding people onto the staff, like pulling them from other places so that they can try to get these processed. It is just overwhelming. There's actually a great opinion piece about how school counselors, high school K through 12 counselors, can be really helpful right now. Because the only hope, if you remember, we had Andrea on, she was like, the only thing that you can be doing right now is going to high schools and getting students to fill out the FAFSA. So FAFSA fairs, get your high school counselors involved, anything you can do so that we can increase that.
Because they're down like 30%.
That's right. I'm worried. A lot of what I'm reading, people are like, yeah, we'll get it worked out for sure by October. But the class of 2028 may just be sacrifice to that. We're seeing very small classes. And when students can't make a decision on the finances of going to school, they're going to postpone it and get into another track, right? And so then they're going to go to a trade school, or they're going to take a year, and it's just going to be really, really overwhelming for our schools. So there's more FAFSA.
Well, I love how the Department of Education is like, just wing it.
Yeah. And everyone's like, that we don't do that. I will say, though, you remember last week we talked about whether or not they were going to push back some of their reporting deadlines. They did choose to do that. So that was helpful, but crazy town.
Well, it makes me think of Robert Heil. He's the CEO of Financial Aid Services. If you're not connected with him on LinkedIn, go look up Robert Heil, because they're providing a lot of great resources right now, especially for smaller schools that are like, what do we do? How do we handle it?
Yeah. In other crazy town news, the NCAA is working to give colleges more hands-on role in NIL deals for athletes. So let's remember, first of all, that there's legislation right now that at least temporarily is suspending the NCAA's ability to enforce any NIL policy. I think they're a little bit hurt about it because they're like, we're still working. So they have a working group, NIL working group, proposals to allow schools to provide assistance and services to students for NIL deals. So they're saying, hey, schools, this can come out of your athletic department. You can vet those deals. You can help negotiate them. You can help broker them. I just see a whole new business being created here.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's crazy, Matt, because what we're doing, we're trying to take the money away from the schools and give them to students. And now NCAA is like, yeah, but schools should be mixed up in those negotiations and what they do there. So this is one of those things where it's like every 3 months we come back and revisit and just say what's going to happen here. So pretty interesting.
I was just thinking, if you are running a university, if you could become an expert on NIL and really connecting your student athletes with great deals, alumni, and all of that, could really be a differentiator for you, right? So I understand what's going on, but there's still so much that's kind of the wild.
That's an interesting idea, that if you were funding your student athletes' tuition by leveraging donorships from your alumni to say, how do you want to enter into an NIL deal with this athlete, right? It is an interesting connection of athletes to a financial source that could help them. So it will be interesting to see how it shakes out. Other good news, hiring for entry-level positions is continuing to remain active through the second quarter as our new graduates are entering the labor market. So there was a March 28th report from a talent solutions and business consulting firm called Robert Half. They surveyed about 1,800 managers with hiring responsibilities. 65% of those companies said they plan to hire entry-level professionals, which is defined as workers with 0 to 2 years of experience. So thinking about our new graduates, there's a pretty strong job market for them. And one interesting development there is that these companies are using AI to train up their new employees. So they're like, yeah, we'll take entry-level employees because we have this training program where they can go through and we can get them leveled up. So I love that use of AI. I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, these last three I'm going to try to remain calm about because they're kind of crazy. California's community colleges are reporting a rise in financial aid fraud. So they're called Pell Runners. These are people who enroll in community college, apply for federal Pell Grants, collect about $8,000, and then totally disappear from the scene. They do things like use retirees' Social Security numbers. They apply from foreign countries. What?
They're not even real people, right?
Well, some of them are bots, but some of them are actually going and scraping Social Security and using retirees' Social Security numbers. So since fall of 2021, California community colleges given more than $5 million to these Pell Runners. What's so interesting about it is there are ways for you to tell that these are made up applications. So it's like online classes that have never been full. All of a sudden, there's a wait list for them. You're used to yielding 1,000 applications in a month. You get 5,000. Right. You have applications coming from outside of the country at a higher rate than is normal. But basically, all of these schools, they started running these reports, and they show that between September 2021 and January 2024, colleges received 900,000 fraudulent college applications and gave fraudsters more than $5 million in federal aid and $1.5 million in state and local aid. So this is going to spur all these companies who are like, hey, we're going to vet the applications. We're going to help you figure out if those are real or not, right? But also you think about real students. There's a story in this article about a student who was in an online class. His Canvas wasn't working, so he couldn't respond to the prompt that the professor gave him. The professor thought he was a bot, dropped him from the class. He had to call the professor, and the professor's like, sorry, I put someone else in your slot, so you have to take it next semester, right? So it just gunks up the whole system and just like puts all of these barriers for us being able to be successful with our students. So that stuff annoys me. This article is out of Forbes. It is worth the entire read. It is called As College Edges Towards Luxury Status, Gucci Offers a Cautionary Tale. So Matt, this article is funny because when I was telling you about it, you're like, I know. And I was like, I know, you know, but not everybody knows. The heart of this article is talking about how brands, which I did not know this. I would really like to know if I'm the only one. I need to take a poll of the office. But brand comes from cattle brand. That's like the first brand there was. And then they adopted it to be goods and services brands, which never made that connection before. You looked at me like I was crazy when I said that. Like everybody knows that. But the heart of this article is, as we are thinking about increasing in college costs for our most elite, AKA luxury colleges, that is all about trying to make tangible what college does for you, right? So in the same way that you're carrying a Gucci bag and people make assumptions about you when you say you went to Harvard, they make the same kind of assumptions about you.
Right.
And there's some evidence in this article that appetites for luxury, both in brands and in colleges, is decreasing, specifically because there's a lot of other alternatives now. We're not being super creative with the way that we're providing either luxury brands or college branding. And people are like, I don't know if that's worth it anymore. I'm not sure how I feel about that. So totally worth reading the whole article. I think it was super interesting. Do you have more to say?
Yeah, I just think there's so much that you could say about this. Like, one, if you think about these luxury colleges, luxury brand colleges, of course, people want to be a part of that tribe, that network, right? In the same way that you're a Yankees fan or whatever, right? Hoosier fan, or right? So you have all of that, but then you were saying in this article, this why schools are spending so much money on their buildings is because this is the physical evidence, the tangibility of this degree that is kind of, hopefully in 4 years you pay a lot of money, and so the buildings are the representation of the quality, right?
Right.
So
the
all
idea,
that,
you're comparing two things. When you talk about a luxury brand, that is tangible. And you can say it is leather and it is crafted well and all of that. And then we're talking about colleges, and you have to have something that you can point to and say, yeah, but look at our res halls. That's why this degree is valuable. The tangibility is in our res halls or our library or whatever.
A little halo effect. When you have a nice building, then you must have great degrees, right?
Yeah, for sure. Lastly, this was a rabbit hole that I went down that I actually didn't need today, but okay. The positive part of this article, it's called Why a College Campus Needs a Referral Guide for Employees, which I'm all behind, right? Because we talk so often about how faculty would like to make referrals on students, your people in your cafeteria, people in work in res halls, they maybe don't know what they're supposed to do. So this article starts with some very positive ideas about how we can provide, both for our students and also for our faculty and staff, this kind of flow chart. So this is an example from Washington University where it's like mental health referrals. Is this an emergency? Call 911. If it's not an emergency, here are 4 other people that you can call. If you want to have ongoing short-term support, here are all of the resources. If you need immediate support, here's who you can call. So I love that. I think that is such a great idea. I'm getting more and more interested in this idea of how we invite students into this journey, right? So we work so much with practitioners that we're just trying to give them all of the right tools. But part of that is, how do we teach students to be self-sufficient and have agency, right? And all of those sorts of things. What a great idea. Then we move on to a faculty and staff resource guide, which I really love as well. 911. What kind of issue is it? You can call these people. Here's in the daytime, the dean's number. You can call the police at night. Love it. Also, look, they have all of the resources. Like, here's everybody on campus. You might need to have a number. I think that that's genius. There's a paragraph in here that says, another college support leaders can prioritize is red folder which helps empower faculty and staff to address issues among students and connect students to the correct care. Which when I heard red folder, I was like, wait a minute. That sounds suspiciously like red flag, which I have.
You got a little
stricken
triggered.
from the record.
Yeah.
I did. And Bailey, put that back up again, because I want everyone to see this is not subtle. This is like, there's a bunch of campuses. This is a sort of nationwide idea where you literally get a red folder that you put on your desk that says, here's what you do. So when a student is in trouble or something's happening with them, the idea is that you reach for the red folder and you're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. And then in the inside, it has resources and that sort of thing. But I was just like, what are we doing? And for some of these referrals, the form talks about what was the incident, what is the name of the student of concern, like what did they do, right? All of those different pieces that are the language that I really don't like. And Matt, I don't know if you remember, we went to a campus one time where they kept talking about red flagged students.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is not what, there maybe are some red flag students, and that's a different protocol. But for most of our students, they're hurting, or they just need someone to see them, or they feel overwhelmed, or they feel stressed. And assigning this red folder priority to them really distresses me.
So, Rachel, one thing that surprises me, so I mean, there's two parts here. One, the color really gets you, right?
Yeah.
So like blue folder would be okay for you.
Well, listen, I found a campus that took red folder, like everything that they do, and they renamed it green folder. And I was like, thank you.
So,
if I was talking to a student reaching for the green folder, I don't have the same sort of like, oh my gosh, this is an emergency, right?
Yeah.
So
the color, but then the other piece that you highlighted is the language matters, right?
Yeah.
What is it you say? Like, I mean, really, what you're doing is creating for that student some idea of like, are they going to be okay?
Yeah. So if you think about the difference between saying to a student, okay, this is a red folder issue, I'm going to report this incident, and you're going to be the student of concern. There's one way to do it.
Yeah.
Or you could say, hey, I have this green folder. It has all of the resources we have. So let's just call John and we'll walk over and they're going to give you what you need. Totally different, right? And if I'm a student, one of those, I feel like something awful is happening. And the other one, I feel like you're being really helpful. And again, I want to make a distinction. I understand sometimes we actually do have red flag students, and that's a different thing. But I think we have to be very careful to paint both of those issues with the same brush. A student care concern is not an incident, and that is not a student of concern, right?
Yeah.
So, okay.
Well, one great way to think about it is if that student calls home and tells their mom what happened.
I got red folder today. You'd be like, oh my gosh, what happened?
Come home. Yeah.
Yeah.
Coming to get you. Yeah. All right.
All right. Well, that is the State of the Union. Look I got pink. Like I am very like riled up about this. I got to calm down a little bit before I can welcome our guest today. Matt, thanks for joining me for the beginning part. I'm going to welcome James Weiser to our show. Hey, James.
Hey, Rachel.
So James is the Dean of Library Information Services and Educational Technology at Abilene Christian University. A couple of introduction points for you. First of all, I'm going to try very hard to call you James and not J.A., which is how I knew you 25 years ago when we first met. So I will, or even better, I should just call you Dr. Weiser.
I guess you can call me that.
Because that's a new moniker for you. And is with January, is that when you finished?
January 22nd. Yes.
Awesome. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I was telling you earlier, usually when we have doctors come on our shows, I find their dissertations, but you are so newly minted that I could not find it yet.
I may not be legit. That's a good point.
Well, it just means
you're taking a lot on faith here.
It just means when it finally gets out there, you'll have to come back and talk to us about the content of your dissertation, which will be helpful. But also Matt was talking about Sing Song. You got to be an illustrious Sing Song judge this past weekend.
I did.
How was that experience?
That was really fun. I would do it again. I tried to adhere to the rubric quite a bit. So some judges, I think, just decide who they like and then
willy-nilly.
then reverse engineer their scores. I actually paid very close attention to the rubric, and there were some surprises. I have to say, I could have been an outlier judge.
Well, I cannot overstate to our audience the seriousness of sing song. I know they don't know what it means, but they'll just have to do a Google search so that they can better understand. I was laughing because, my husband, who went to Hardin-Simmons,
Mhm.
and when we first started dating, they have something called Sing. And he was like, oh, it's like sing song. And I went and I was like, no, honey, this is not like sing song. It is a much smaller scale. And the heritage of ACU is Church of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Which is a cappella, which
Correct.
means our students are used to a cappella singing, which is what sing song is, right?
That's correct. It's from 1957. So it goes back a long, long time.
It's been around. Well, I was happy to have somebody familiar with a cappella singing on the judging panel.
Well, and I did not go to ACU, so I had no penalties. I was paying myself for bribes. No one bribed me. Maybe I didn't get that message out well enough. If I judge again, I'm definitely becoming more explicit in my receptiveness to bribery.
Well, everyone's unhappy no matter what, right? Except for the winners. Everyone's like, no, there was foul play here. So you might as well take bribes because then,
there are less innocent conspiracy theories for sure.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing, I didn't mention this to you before, but I was looking up some of your publications and you have an article that's called Saying His Name, specifically around George Floyd. One of your co-authors on that is Dr. Liz Rainey, who is one of our clients at Loino. So I didn't realize that you knew her. How did you guys get connected?
So Liz and I both did the same program at the University of Texas at Austin, the Doctor of Education, Higher Education Leadership. She was in cohort number 1. I believe I was in cohort number 3. And so we all shared, Liz and I had the same advisor who subsequently has passed away, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
But most of my dissertation was inspired by Dr. Pat Summers, who was Liz's advisor. And that article, that research project was the brainchild of Pat, and she included some of her grad students on it. And so Liz and I got to know each other through that. And I didn't realize that, but yeah, Liz is amazing and
she is
a complete superstar. And I've learned so much from her. And
yeah,
it was a really interesting project too. So.
Yeah, it's good. Okay, so I have some questions for you. Let's start with the context of all of the things that you have done since you kind of entered this field of higher education. Can you tell us some of the positions in some of the universities that you've worked at?
Sure. So I had a panic attack in the middle of the LSAT when I was an undergraduate. And I assumed I wanted to go to law school. And at the time I realized, oh my goodness, I don't want to go to law school. I don't want to spend the rest of my career with these people. I kind of had this identity crisis at age 21 or 22. And I realized my favorite job, I was a Barnes & Noble bookseller. And what could I be that was like that? And that's when I changed to become a librarian. So I went to Indiana University Bloomington for my master's in library science. And while there, met my wife, who was getting a PhD in political science. And so she's kind of dragged me around the world at some degree into the higher ed world. My first job out of library school was actually with General Motors in Detroit. So I did competitive intelligence, doing research on our competitors, finding out through patent analysis and through biography research, what the CEO of Toyota liked to eat for breakfast, what kinds of things they were patenting. And as I was told by a presentation with SCIP, which is the Society of Competitive Intelligence Professionals, once that gets into your blood, it never really leaves. And so I have fought a legacy of creepiness ever since. My friends always say I'm the creepiest person they know. And they're right, I am. But that's because I love to do research on people, organizations, and institutions, which actually helps in higher ed.
Yeah.
So when my wife finished her PhD, she was hired at Pepperdine University in Malibu, California, and I moved with her in 2004. Very quickly, I was put in charge of the business library there. And after a while, I then became director of the graduate campus libraries for Pepperdine. I did that for a while when the executive director of the Library Consortium of Private Universities in Texas and California tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, I'm looking for an assistant director. Would you be interested? And at that time, I guess I was 20, no, I would have been about 30 or 31 years old. And realizing that I had a pretty long runway before I needed to retire, I better learn as much as I can. So that was that kind of, when you look at my vita or my resume, you might say, well, you've done a lot of things in 5-year increments. And it's because I've been mortified of retirement and trying to figure out how, in the current milieu of the economy, can I make sure my skills remain current? Well, it's to keep learning. So I've looked for a variety of experiences, knowing that, who knows when they'll come into handy. But I was a library consortium assistant director, then worked for Sage Publishing, which is an academic publisher. I really loved that job, but it was so much travel. I was on the road 90 nights in a hotel. And while, the airline status was great and the hotel status was great, we were about to have our first child, and that wouldn't be good for anyone. And so I stepped into a consortium director role as the director of the Library Consortium for California's community colleges. So I listened with intrigue to your previous story in the State of the Union about the Pell Runners and the CCCs. And then in 2020, my wife and I had a midlife crisis and decided to move to Texas. And there are far less innocent midlife crises too. But I had been an admirer of this university in Abilene for many years. I'd known many of the librarians, and we have a really great library staff. And it's a really fun place to be. And so we came to Texas. And during that time, I enrolled at the University of Texas at Austin for my doctoral program in higher educational leadership. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of my bio. I have two children, 8 and 6. I obsess about higher ed because I think in 10 years, my older child will be going to college, and I can't imagine what that choice will look like for us. We're going to be a little bit more educated than maybe the average consumer when it comes time for college choice. Ultimately, it will be their decision. But I watch with sheer panic and anxiety about the cost structure and how much it's going to be by the time my children get there.
It's so interesting when you have younger children, because there are things like, before I had Lillian, all this conversation about things like social media. Mm-hmm. And I was like, please let them work it out by the time we're faced with that with her, right? Yeah. Or higher education is another one. It's like, we're in flux. Everybody's trying to figure out what to do. Please have it figured out before we get to that crossroads of what is the right thing to do and how are we going to pay for it and what does it mean and all of those things. So it does make you a little bit more, you have more skin in the game, right? As you see your kids progressing towards that.
Absolutely.
So I want to talk about collaboration. Mm-hmm. You have an article that you wrote, which is called What Collaboration Means to Me, Seeking Humility in an Insecure World. Mm-hmm. I think it's a really helpful article just about this idea of how we show up in collaboration. And I appreciate it because so often when I'm on a campus talking to people, their definition of collaboration is, will everybody just do what I want them to? Right. Like, I don't understand why this is hard. We're going to collaborate. Go do this. And then people are like, that's not really the spirit of it. Right.
It's like eating vegetables. We all know we need to do it, but actually doing it is a little harder.
Totally different. Yeah. So as you think about collaboration, I want to start with the role of collaboration on a campus, on a college campus. And I think there's two streams there, maybe in general, how we think about collaboration with our colleagues. And then also, as you think about your work with the library and educational technology, how would you talk about collaboration in those two ways?
Yeah, I have a lot to say. Let's see if I can make it somewhat linear and coherent. I think it's natural for all of us who are members of an identified guild, which is what I think of librarians. I mean, we, for the most part, all went to library schools. We were trained to be X. And that X has changed quite a bit, even in 20 years. And there is a temptation for us as we sit in our guild, our building, that we almost have a greater sense of loyalty towards members of our guild at other institutions than we have to those who aren't a member of our guild at our own institution. And one of the things I say when I do consulting, because I do a little bit of consulting with libraries, is feel free to make your library look different than any other academic library in the world, because it should, because your university is different from every other university in the world. Therefore, the best possible library to serve it should look a little different. And when I think of collaboration, I think it's really important for us in libraries to collaborate with people who aren't librarians on our own campuses, and to have the humility to say, you know, I learned this in library school. They told me that I should care about this, but maybe that's not a really important thing on this campus. Or maybe there is something important that students really need on my campus, or that my faculty really need, that we never talked about in library school. And to have the courage and the flexibility to say, look, we're just going to do this, and maybe no one else in the world is doing it, but for us, it makes sense to do it. And so I think the spirit of that article was written when I was coming from a vendor. I worked for a publisher, and there's some antipathy between librarians and publishers because money's exchanged, and I get it. But I actually co-edited a book called Open Book: A Librarian's Guide to Publishing, that the spirit of which was to try to bring librarian and publisher voices together, because ultimately I think we, meaning librarians and publishers, the scholarly communication ecosystem, rise and fall together. When our students can't access something, they don't care about the publisher and they don't care about the library. They care about they need their stuff.
Yeah.
So all of us who work to provide stuff rise and fall based on that level of customer satisfaction.
Yeah.
And so I think also the other thing I would say, the second part of that, as far as collaboration, is those of us in the library world probably need to do a better job. And I can't speak for other campus organizations, though you can correct me or tell me if this is true. We may to look at ways in which we can collaborate with other institutions to do our work in more streamlined and efficient ways. So, for example, I'm going to give a shout out to my own little hometown here in West Texas. Abilene, Texas is a fantastic library ecosystem because of something called the Abilene Library Consortium. That's Hardin-Simmons, McMurray, ACU, and the public library, and as well as Howard Payne University in Brownwood. We share a library catalog. We share a collection. Twice a day, we have a courier that runs from campus to campus to deliver books and items to each other's patrons. And what that does is that allows us at ACU not to have to think that we have to provide all of the materials for our campus community. So if Hardin-Simmons wants to spend more money on political science books, which they do, much to the chagrin of my political science spouse, then I'm going to feel comfortable letting them do that, because then I can spend more money on chemistry resources. And then in sharing, we have built a more than research library for the city of Abilene in a way that no single institution here would be able to do that. I mean, we have a larger library system in Abilene, Texas, than the entire Oklahoma City Public Library has.
Wow.
And I don't know that a lot of folks in Abilene realize that, but it's a wonderful example of collaboration. Are there other campus entities that could do that? I don't know. In student affairs, maybe not. That's really high touch.
Yeah.
But in terms of back office processes, streamline, there's no reason why, for example, all of us should have 2 or 3 catalogers when we can employ central catalogers to do the work of the Library Consortium.
Yeah.
I don't know if that gets to the question you're asking.
Sure.
This is somewhat of a passion of mine.
One thing I've been reading recently about adaptive leadership, and one of the examples that they give in that model is that it's really hard. I'm thinking about you saying we identify more with being librarians than we do on our campus, right? Yeah. And so one of the examples it gives is you're a carrot and these people are potatoes, and you go into the stew together. And you get changed a little bit, right? So I think about a librarian on your campus, like depending on what your faculty need and what your students need, and that changes you a little bit. But there's some resistance to then having to go back to the carrot land. And they're like, where have you been? Because, right? Because you left and now you're coming back into your discipline and you're not exactly the same way that you were because you've been transformed by your community, right?
Well, and I have a very good friend. I'm not going to say who he is, but I guess I've said his gender, who was a librarian and a library administrator who has crossed that divide to go work for a library vendor and is trying to get back into the world of academic librarianship. And he's not getting very far. There are a lot of really well-regarded, well-known academic libraries who will pass on him because they say he's been tainted as being a vendor.
Right.
And I just can't overemphasize how angry that makes me, because there are many skills that I learned being in the vendor world that I never saw in the academic library world. Things like how to run a meeting, how to be on time, we those of us who work in a higher ed, we're a strange bunch of people at times.
Yeah.
And there are sometimes we misbehave and have behaviors that are just not accepted in the business world. And that has served me, I think, pretty well.
Yeah. That kind of cross-pollination, I think, is so important. And I think it's important for faculty. It's important for staff. If you think about how we all get in a room together with our clear perspective, right? I do show up as a counselor. You do show up as a librarian. Matt does show up as a business faculty, right? We have our clear perspectives. And yet there are problems and situations we can look at together where we learn from each other about how to approach that, which seems like really the heart of this article. And I love our Abilene Library, public library system. It is very rare that I need a book that I can't find, that they won't have sent to me from somewhere. So I'm with you on that. I'll give them a shout as well.
Out here on the plains of West Texas.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. I think about in higher education, this idea of faculty, especially in academics. Our faculty are kind of the engine for academics. And I think about the library as the fuel. And so thinking about when you're considering how the library on your campus serves your students, like the position and the service that you give, what is at the heart of what the library should be doing for students?
Yeah, that's interesting. Many people, including, I cited him in my dissertation, but it was the president of Harvard who called the library the heart of the university more than 100 years ago. And I appreciate that comparison, but I actually think the library is the blood of the university, not to be going too down into an anatomy rabbit hole, because there are many things that a university can want to do, but if it doesn't have adequate information resources, it's like an organ that's not getting good blood flow. It will eventually die. It will wither and rot, and you'll need to amputate it. And what we in the library do is provide scholarly information, because more books were printed last year, more print books were printed last year than at any time in the history of humanity. So when people say, well, isn't everything online? Of course it isn't. In fact, there is more in print than ever before. What's also crazy is at ACU, we circulated more print books last year than at any time in the university's history that we can we know, because people are still buying and using print books. In addition to books, we have journals that we need. And if you're a growing university like the one where I work, where you're moving more into allied health or medical or nuclear, you have to have research available to faculty to be able to do their own research, but also to teach students. Because I just don't believe in the dichotomy between research and teaching. Good research impacts good teaching, and good teaching leads to good research. And at the heart of that, if you will, the blood of that are information resources. So at a very bare minimum, what we at the library do is to provide access to that by doing a lot of things that people may not realize. So for example, we look here at ACU, we know what an interlibrary loan cost is. It's about $15 an article. And we meticulously track cost per use for all of our electronic resources. And if something is below $15, we generally know then it's actually cheaper for us to subscribe to it than it is for us not to subscribe to it.
Yeah.
But when something gets above 16, in that Mendoza line, then we look to cut it or reduce it or try to figure out some other way we can do. But we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on electronic subscriptions to journals that historians are using to teach their classes. Our engineering faculty are using on a daily basis to teach theirs, to do their own research. The library is every bit as important as it has been before. It may not mean that the library as a place is as important, because in the print world, There was one building where faculty and students had to come to get their information.
Yeah.
That's not true anymore. And that hasn't been true for 20 or 30 years. As long as people realize, well, someone is behind the scenes buying, acquiring, curating, and mounting this information and analyzing it, and those are the library, I'm comfortable with that. But, do we need as much space for, do we need 40 laptops or computers out in our information commons today when people have more computing power on their phone than they did 15 years ago when we put those? Probably not.
Yeah, it's such an interesting evolution, right? You think about when I started school, computer labs were new, and the library was only books and microfiche, right? That's what we did. And then you had, okay, now the library should be a place where computers live because this is where students are going to come to try to get that information. And now it's like, no, we need tables. We don't need to have computers because everybody has a computer. It's a really interesting 20-year span, right, of progression there.
And I actually used the microfiche machine here for the first time about 2 weeks ago.
Really?
Because one of our faculty members was looking for a Wall Street Journal article from so many years back. We have it in digital, but not that far back. So I went down and dusted off the microfiche machine, had to get a colleague to teach me how to do it, how to use it. And we found the article, printed it, and sent it to him. So, I mean,
that's so fun. I had to use, let's see, the reason I know about the microfiche machine is because I had a history teacher who made us go back and look at, what is it, the New Orleans Picayune?
Yeah, that's not Times-Picayune, yeah.
There you go. Yeah. Shout out Dr. Bailey. I remember using the microfiche for that. And you had to go back and talk about like things that were happening in them. So we've come a long way. We've come a long way.
I mean, librarians look different than we used to. I mean, in my career, I've had a couple of interesting encounters. I remember one time when I was directing the business library at Pepperdine, I was in my office, which was a fishbowl. There was glass, I could see out to the main stacks where the students were. And I had a student knock on the door, and she came in the office, and I said, "Oh, can I help you?" And she said, "I was just wondering when you were going to do your job." And I said, "Excuse me?" And she said, "It's kind of loud out there, and I thought you were going to shush people." And I just smiled, and I said, "Oh, well, we don't really do that.
We don't do that.
We like noise."
Yeah.
And then, inevitably someone will point to me and say, "That's our library dean. He doesn't look like a librarian." Like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know. I don't have a bun.
That issue of noise is so funny because I forgot. I mean, I was working at AC when we did that transition from all stacks, and it was completely quiet. We used to whisper to each other when we were talking, right? And then
for sure. And
that's right. No, that's
we're just bringing pizza in all the time, and it's.
I need to ask my daughter if she knows if she associates quiet with the library.
Well,
I think she would.
The pendulum is swinging. So
is it?
we, for example, and I don't want to go too off track of where you want to talk, but LibQual is an assessment tool that most academic libraries at some point or another have deployed to assess the quality of their academic library service. And you can benchmark that against other institutions that have also administered LibQual. And one of the things we at ACU learned when we did this in 2021 is that our students actually didn't think our library was quiet enough. They want more quiet space because in our busy, hectic lives of noise that, with TikTok and our phones, actually having a place to sit and be contemplative or actually sit with a thought for a minute is a gift. And so many of our spaces in the library world 20 years ago were built to do away with that. And certainly in this library, we did that because that was what was cutting edge at the time. Yeah. Now you see in Library Journal, the architecture issue that should be coming out any day now because it comes out every April in Library Journal, more and more libraries are bringing the stacks back because of the sound buffering and because of the architecture forms you as a human being. We know this. And so the library is that cathedral on most university campuses that encourages and inspires academic work. And if your library looks like an airport terminal, as someone called us in the comments of LibQual, then it just doesn't inspire you to greater academic success.
Yeah, isn't it interesting that the library, in both cases, 20 years ago, when this idea of collaboration and studying together and bringing your laptop, right, that it was a different space than you could find other places on campus. And now it's the same thing, except in the opposite way, right? Now we're all collaborating. We need a space maybe where we could be quiet.
Right. And so many spaces otherwise on campus have built, like in res halls, like, you see a fairly common trend in res halls now to build collaborative spaces in the dorms.
Yeah.
And so
maybe we need a quiet place. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
That's so good. Okay. Well, I would be remiss if I did not ask you about AI.
Oh, sure.
First of all, let me tell you, I was reading an article the other day about how I just love librarians so much. They're so helpful. They're so thoughtful about things.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading an article about how a lot of librarians are taking this cause of AI and saying, we need to understand this. We've got to make sense of it. We want that to live in our wheelhouse so that we can help our faculty and our students really know what to do with it. And it reminds me of when the internet started.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Where it was like, okay, here's a tool and our job is to be thoughtful and do research and figure out how we're going to use this. So your reflections on AI these days.
I think your example of the internet 25 years ago, I mean, my goodness, probably longer now, mid 90s is the good example. Librarians in the early 90s, mid 90s were more reticent to embrace the future of technology. Like I remember forever, Google was an enemy to librarians because not everything is free and available on Google. And that's true, but there's a lot that is.
Yeah.
And so what we learned in the librarian profession, I hope, is that if there is a tidal wave coming, swim along with it and try to teach people how to use it when that time comes. Most librarians I know are not anti-AI. I think actually the instructional faculty are far more anti-AI than librarians are.
Yeah.
Because librarians, I think our DNA is we just kind of are more pragmatic and we see this is happening. This isn't, I mean, large language models are not going away. You can't put that toothpaste back in the toothpaste tube.
Right.
So what can you do to create a learning situation that is impactful and meaningful for critical thinking skills that and I've seen that, for example, you just have to rework classroom assignments to assume AI. That's what I would tell faculty and have on this campus. And we are looking, how can it help us do our work more quickly? I mean, I can tell you, so my preferred large language model is Claude. I receive no money from Claude. I like it better than ChatGPT. And yesterday I had a meeting with an administrator here, and we needed to, we talked about generating a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, for another faculty member here on campus. And I left the meeting at 3, went back to my office, went into Claude and wrote the prompts. And that MOU had been generated in almost its perfection within 20 minutes. I mean, I had done that in 20 minutes. It took Claude about, 10 seconds once I'd done the prompts. I mean, my goodness, how efficient.
Why not?
Why wouldn't I do that?
Right.
I mean, so to learn the appropriate use, should I use it to write a term paper? Absolutely not. There's ethical considerations. I'm really glad, for example, that my doctoral dissertation was largely baked before the generative AI explosion happened. So I wouldn't have been tempted to even think about using it. But I will tell you one thing I did. When I actually had my dissertation defended, I was supposed to submit it to the University of Texas Graduate School with an abstract. And so I thought, hey, let's do this. I'm going to submit it to Claude and see. And it took about a 160-page document and in about 20 seconds condensed it to an abstract that was really good. I mean, I probably could have taken a couple of hours, fidgeting and futzing with it, and it wouldn't have been as good as that. And so why not learn how to embrace it and talk about the ethical ways to use it, and let it help us.
Yeah, for sure. It's really interesting because I've said this on the show before. On some campuses, they're like, we're not going to talk about it. Mm-hmm. We're not going to have a policy. We're just going to wait and see what happens, which I think is about fear. Sure. I think it's about making the wrong decision, right? But again, like with the internet, I mean, I remember you had to teach students how to do Google questions. Here's the way you're going to put it in, right? And here's your search, the kinds of phrases you should look for and those sorts of things. And so thinking, first of all, that Matt and I were saying the other day, when it comes to cheating, it's much better to give students good tools and good thought process for why they should or should not cheat versus trying to restrict them, because they've got a lot of time on their hands and they're smarter than you when it comes to technology. Right? So
I mean, we have an
having those conversations.
Yeah, we have an instructor on this campus who has an interesting approach. He asks his students to use an AI tool to write a term paper or write a paper, and then they critique it. You have to critique that. Which is a way to, is that currently outsmarting AI? Maybe eventually AI will critique AI. Maybe there will be a reflexivity part of it that we can't yet determine. But I tend not to get too upset about these things.
Yeah.
It's if it's inevitable, use it to your advantage.
I'm actually very curious. I was reading something the other day where in K-12 teachers were saying, I actually have gone back to having my students longhand write out their papers because I send them home and then I'm not sure whether or not. So it's interesting again, right? This pendulum swing of where we type everything. And then it may be that now we come back to you're submitting Blue Book essays again.
I think buy stock in whoever publishes Blue Books, because I know I have heard faculty friends say they're bringing them back in a way that I couldn't have imagined before. And honestly, that technology, if it's a technology, is fine.
Right.
The ability to actually think on the fly and write. I mean, that's what we're testing. So I see no problem with Blue Books.
Yeah, I really like the idea too of having a student write a paper and then do a presentation of it, right? Because if it comes from AI and they then synthesize that information in a way that they can talk about it and teach it, then you've accomplished what you've tried to accomplish, right? It's the end of the paper as the sort of evidence of the synthesis that you should have been doing in your education. I think that's what AI is really going to blow up.
And it's kind of like, I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, so I'm not a pro at parenting, but one thing I've been a kid before, and the trust that is built, like, when my own mom wouldn't give me a curfew and just said, look, I'm going to be on the couch. You don't have a curfew, come home anytime. Well, then suddenly I thought, I don't want her to stay up all that late, so I better come home on time. If you're an instructor who's like, absolutely no, well, you're basically daring your students to try to cheat or get around you. It's far better to actually meet them in the middle and walk together towards that path of learning.
Yeah, for sure. So good. Okay, we just have a couple of minutes, but I do have a question about, I was talking to a guest, I think last week, and she was saying, sometimes in our jobs, whether you're a librarian or a dean of students or a counselor or whatever you are, in our jobs, we're in this place of busyness where we're just doing our work. Mm-hmm. And then occasionally there are times where we look up and we see the students in front of us and go, oh, right. This is what we're doing this for, right? So in your work, where are those opportunities for you to look up from all of the things that you're managing and just be very present with the students on your campus?
So I don't know if I can only speak for myself. I am actually going to be teaching in the fall, Cornerstone, which is our first year seminar. And this is something I've wanted to do. I've been fortunate being married to a faculty member who invites students to our home. I've kind of by proxy gotten to know a lot of students, and then I've known student workers in the library. But I do think that's a challenge for librarians is, when they come to you, it's a very transactional, help me find this or check out this or do that. You don't get to know students on a deeper level. Some do. I think of Melinda Isbell in my own library, who is fantastic at that. But you have to be intentional. Also, let's be clear, a lot of librarians are a bit introverted. So that may not be our default. But the reason I want to be in the classroom. I want to get to know students and be the instructor of record. And as I've told the individual who directs our own Cornerstone I may fail spectacularly. If I need to be fired, I've just asked him to not make it awkward. I think you have to be in the classroom, because I do think at its core, higher education is what happens in the classroom between faculty and students. All the other things are important, and yet that's the one thing. When you ask a student, what are the 20 years from now, 30 years from now, you just mentioned it with Dr. Bailey in the microfiche example. Those experiences are the things that transform us and the things that we remember.
Yeah, that's
so I think you've got to get in the classroom.
I was thinking about the specific personality type of person who likes to become librarian. And I don't know if you know that I'm on the introversion extroversion scale. I am as introverted as you can get, which is interesting because I know how to do extroversion, but it's not my favorite.
Sure.
And I was a very at-risk student when I was in school. And I just wonder if there were not people in the library who were more like me, who I would have identified with, as opposed to some of the extroverted places on campus where I felt super overwhelmed.
Sure.
I think it's a great conversation to have with our librarians to say, look for someone like you.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to do chit chat. You can just say, here's a book I love, you should read it. Or, right? Like there's maybe some ways we could orchestrate some student connections, because librarians are a different kind of person on our campus and would maybe resonate with a different kind of student. So that's fun. We should think about that.
Yeah. Did I hear you just say you may wish you had become a librarian? It's never too late.
Listen, my two careers, once I finish this one, so you're going to retire. My two careers are, I'm going to become a preschool teacher for 3-year-olds. They're my favorite. And I'm going to volunteer at the library because I'm not so good at the organization part, but I love learning and research. Okay. So if you can put me on that, I'll do that.
You can have my job someday.
Sounds good. Hey, James, thanks so much for joining me. It's been really awesome. I think it's just a helpful perspective for our listeners to hear about the blood of our campuses. So thank you so much for that. Listeners, we are going to be off next week. And then the week after that will be our very last episode. And then we'll go into reruns of our Anthony Malcurie show. So thank you guys for listening. Always good to spend time with you. Have a great day.
Thanks.